Welcome to this, I guess, special event, Town Hall, Art in the Time of Crisis. Um, it's it's kind of I wouldn't say a misnomer, but I think it's kind of a broader definition of what this discussion will encompass. And I'm sure we're going to skew off onto tangents in filmmaking and music and journalism as well. You'll notice if you registered earlier this week, we're one person short. Oksana, unfortunately, wasn't able to make it last minute. And we can understand that given the climate of everything. So we still have Michelle Daniel, who is an expert in Russia and Eastern European affairs, and myself, who is not an expert by any means, but I have seen all the frontline specials on Vladimir Putin. So I'm almost there. You're welcome, everybody. And I'm sorry at the same time. Now, before we start though, a little background on Michelle. She is I'm just going to read directly from your bio. She is a professional musician, writer, and podcaster based in Austin, Texas. As a pianist and composer, she has performed globally, taught music for over 22 years, and in 2 Grammy nominations. In 2008, after working as a screenwriter and script doctor for a Los Angeles production company, she pursued a Master of Arts in Russian Studies to complement her geopolitical writing. After spending a summer in Russia, she completed a nonfiction book on Cold War radio broadcasting, which will be published later this year. Currently, she works for the University of Texas at Austin, where she produces podcasts and other media. I will also add that she's a wonderful writer who's contributed a few pieces to Pipeline Artists, both of which scathingly touch upon Vladimir Putin, and justifiably so. So we only have an hour. It'll fly by, and it might spill over. It's being recorded, so if you can't make it for the whole thing, you can always come back and visit it later. But before we start, just note for the attendees, we'll be dropping links to relevant articles and interviews and so forth in the chat thread. So please feel free to ask any questions using the Q&A box on the bottom part of your screen. It's a smaller group this time for a town hall. It's not the 300 some odd people we've had before, so we'll be able to get to any questions throughout, I'm sure. Okay, I have a bunch of talking points, but I'm going to start with what I thought was an easy question, and now I'm not so sure when we discussed it briefly yesterday. But it has to do with how filmmakers are documenting the war, in particular one person. So yesterday I mentioned to Michelle how just before the onset of the war, I think it was February 23rd, they said that Sean Penn was in Ukraine, interviewing Zelensky, and with a small film crew, and putting together what I would assume will be some sort of a documentary on the war before he left the country. My first reaction to that was, what a dimwit, why is he doing that? But then I instantly sort of reversed and changed course on that and thought, well, it's important to document. Someone's going to have to document it eventually. Why not him? I suppose. It just struck me as odd. I'm curious what your thoughts were on
that. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's good that someone like Sean Penn, someone with a name, someone with a platform, this incredible, legacy in film and whatnot is taking such an interest in a country that perhaps he really has not a lot of connection to, but through that interest, he's able to generate a lot of awareness, in the Western community, right? Which is great. On the other hand, though, I guess I would also, and actually, I didn't even catch that headline until you had mentioned it yesterday. But on the other hand, I would kind of say, well, is he the person to do it? Because, there's just so much cultural nuance and, understanding and, background knowledge that's required to really be able to even begin to understand what Ukraine is, much less document a war that's in Ukraine. And so my first concern is like, well, is he just picking things that are relevant to him and, you know, his cultural understanding, which is probably pretty limited, but like him as an American, as an American filmmaker, is he just picking and choosing things that you know he understands, but that are maybe is not quite as meaningful, or what the Ukrainians themselves might want him documenting. So, I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
That's a good point. I think, and we can circle back and touch upon this later because I think it's important, and I know you mentioned that you had thoughts on it as well. But is there a bias in the way Western filmmakers, not Western filmmakers, but the filmmakers of the West give preference to certain subjects over other subjects? For example, when the war in Syria broke out, I didn't see a whole lot of American filmmakers clamoring to go and film it. And not only is there a bias, which I think I know the answer to, but what is that bias stemming from? Is it racism? Is it Islamophobia? Is it just the simple fact that we don't identify with those other cultures as much as we might a European country?
Yeah, no, that's really key actually, because you know, and we were kind of chatting a little bit earlier, that I think there is a lot of there's a lot that goes into which crises, which wars, which conflicts we choose to give our attention to, you know, and I think it does depend largely on what's relevant to you, you know, to us. So, you know, for me, I would say personally that something like the crisis in Yemen that I mentioned to you before, you know, 100,000 people died there, and yet I barely focused on that. And not that it's not important, it's extremely important, but it's like it wasn't relevant to me. And so, and something like the crisis in Syria, the horrors that went on with Libya, with their civil war. I mean, all those things are important, but yet, yeah, you're not going to see a Sean Penn or similar going down there and making these documentaries and doing, you know, trying to convey to the West that this is extremely important. Why is it Ukraine? Why is that so important? And yeah, I mean, maybe there is an element of racialization there, like, you know, Ukrainians are white people, you know, and
Right.
I don't know. I mean, is that part of it? I don't want to say it is, but maybe, or like you said, maybe just culturally speaking, they're more part of Europe, and so Europe in general is less foreign rather to us in the States, Canada, whatever, than the Middle East, which does seem, it has this exoticism that goes well beyond our purview and our cultural like understanding or synonymism. So
Right. I think it's probably a conglomeration of
yeah.
factors. I think I remember, and not that I'm you know, I'm so focused on Yemen and Syria and so forth, but foreign policy and foreign affairs generally interest me. So I tend to watch different documentaries on those types of things. And I remember years back, also a Frontline documentary. Big fan of Frontline, obviously. But there was a few specials on Syria, and I'm watching this thinking, why isn't this a bigger news story? Why aren't filmmakers covering it? Even whether it's, I'm not saying do a scripted film about it, but something to bring awareness to what's going on, right? And there's really not much. And when it comes to Yemen, for someone who does gravitate for that, I have no idea what's going on in Yemen, right? But I know what's going on in Europe, generally speaking. I definitely know what's going on in America, or Canada, or Australia. It's an interesting bias. I don't know what the solution is, and I guess that's how I could end that topic. I have no idea how to quote unquote fix that, but it just struck me initially as something that felt like an opportunist move, even though the ethics might have been there. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's yeah, opportunist.
We can leave that dangling. It's fine.
Yeah, I think we should leave that one dangling,
Yeah,
but
I'm curious to see what becomes of it and the footage that
yeah, for
they
sure.
put together. Uh, Changing gears, you live in Austin, and South by Southwest was last week, and
Yep.
I'm sure it was very crowded there, and tons of things going on. But you helped organize and put together, not single-handedly helped organize a event that featured a Ukrainian musician. I was wondering if you could touch upon that and
Yeah.
let us know how that happened and how her family, or not her family, but her bandmates had to stay behind.
Yeah, so this was a really incredible, on the one hand, was a heartbreaking story for the artist, the Ukrainian artist, but on the other hand, it presented this incredible opportunity for them as well, and then also uh, a great opportunity for me too to be able to kind of leverage all the connections I had here in Austin and within the university and without and throughout the whole state of Texas to be able to put something together that would help give this Ukrainian artist a platform and essentially amplify her voice, right? So South by Southwest, I'm sure a lot of y'all know what that is, but just gigantic festival, right? It's film, it's music, it's business, it's everything. It's this huge, huge deal, and um, it congests Austin basically every year except for the year of the pandemic, and then I believe last year too. So this is kind of like the first one we've had since the pandemic, and it was great. But so we had, prior to this war, which very, unfortunately launched right before South by Southwest was supposed to take place, there were several Ukrainian artists that were slated to be featured at South by Southwest, several big names in Ukraine, in Russia, and so forth. None of them could make it. And none of them could make it because, well, one, they couldn't leave the country because most of them were male.
Mhm.
And because of martial law, mandating that all these males 18 through, I forget the upper cutoff, but you can imagine most of these young pop star guys, like they fit the bill. And so
Right.
they have to stay behind to defend the country. Well, one band named Kaska, Kazka, they're a very, very big sensation in Ukraine, not just in Ukraine, but in Russia as well. And their lead singer is female. So, and her name is Alexandra Zaritska. So everyone calls her Sasha. She was able to leave the country, and she was able to leave with her mother and her sisters, and her three dogs, as she constantly reminds me. So she made it to Poland, and they were in Warsaw, I believe. Yeah, Warsaw. And while in Warsaw, in the days following, in the beginning of the war, so like February 25th, 26th, 27th, she was sitting there basically and contemplating whether or not she should go through with the South by Southwest concert that was scheduled for her band, rather, for her whole band, for Kaska. There were several considerations. I mean, one, she had to leave her whole band behind, right, in Ukraine. So she's just a singer. She's not a musician in the traditional sense. She doesn't play an instrument or anything like that. Of course, she has backing tracks like every, pop star out there, playbacks that can accompany her without anybody, but, it's not the same thing.
The rest of her band is male. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. The rest of her band was male. And so, and also just a note is that this South by Southwest concert that they had scheduled for her for Kaska was supposed to be the start of their international tour. Essentially, they were going to do this gigantic I'm Ukraine concert tour. And if you check out their Instagram, which they have a ton of followers and everything, it's just like that. Everyone was so excited about them starting their tour, and they were going to be touring a ton of cities across the U.S. and all that. And so But obviously that entire tour was canceled. It had to be canceled, or at least postponed indefinitely. So here in Austin, I didn't know about any of this, but I got a call from my boss at UT, from the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and they were like, "Well, so we think that this girl, this refugee pop singer, essentially, she has a visa to come to the U.S., and we think that she needs help in in musically speaking, and in figuring out her concert and stuff, because before she was supposed to perform with a lot of other Ukrainian groups, and then it just, none of them showed up. So now it was just, she was going to be the lone Ukraine representative. And so for a couple days, it was like, we were all like, well, is she coming or is she not coming? And she had to debate. And so in the end, she finally decided she wanted to be the voice of Ukraine, and she had to go to America. So she came to America. This showcase, so it turned out to be not just a concert, but a showcase. So South by Southwest said, you guys can have a 5-hour time, like, block of time on the very last day of the festival, and to basically do a Ukraine event kind of thing that will raise money as well for the people in Ukraine. And so I had 1 week to throw this all together, and to work with this pop star that I had never met before. I did find out that I had been listening to her band without knowing it for like a couple years. So that was great. That was serendipitous, really serendipitous, because I knew the songs, so it helped. But so yeah, I had 1 week, and that's insane. And if anyone's ever tried to put together any major event of any sort, like, you definitely need more than 1 week. So this was a total miracle, and a lot of musicians and people came together to help me, and it was just amazing how many people wanted to stand in solidarity with Ukraine, how many Austinites and Texans and Americans in general who just wouldn't have cared less about Ukraine before, or didn't even necessarily know where it was on the map, and couldn't have told you what colors were on the flag.
Right.
Yeah. We're now
true.
like, sporting blue and gold and yellow, and flashing sunflowers everywhere, and saying, yes, Michelle, whatever you need, we're there. We're gonna come together. And all these companies were like donating, and donating equipment to make the showcase happen. They were like throwing like really well-known bands in the state of Texas, at least. All these well-known bands were like, yeah, we'll come play for free. And so, like, within 5 days, I had the whole showcase filled out. And then Zaritska, Sasha, comes herself, and she lands in Austin on Thursday, so literally like 2 days before the showcase. And we, it was amazing getting to meet her, because she was not what I thought she would be. She was not this broken, meek, like, scared woman or young woman, and she's 29, right? And she was not that at all. And she was vivacious. She was she knew her mind. She spoke her mind quite vividly, and she was just a ray of sunshine, I would say. And despite the fact that she had to leave her boyfriend behind, leave her whole band behind, and they'd been together from the very beginning for five years solid, And so it was amazing. And I was like, wow, she definitely has what it takes to be the voice of Ukraine. So I felt like more motivated after that. And then, with her, I did my best to like coach her and figure out what songs she needed to sing, and how to present herself. So, because there was a little bit of fashioning we had to do, we had to change her from being this just Ukrainian front woman of a band, right, to being a Ukrainian solo artist that is trying to appeal to the West. And so that took some packaging. I mean, it really did. And that took me having to assert myself as a musician, as a producer, as you know, all the as someone who's had a ton of experience being a musical director and working with a lot of different bands, I had to kind of get her to trust me. She did. However, I ran into a lot of trouble with her record company. So
Right.
the producer of her record company was like so convinced he knew what was right and what was right, what was right. And he's like the Simon Cowell of Ukraine and Russia over there, basically. But he's a nice guy. So unlike Simon Cowell, he's really nice, right?
Right.
So, and he's really amazing, a very, very sweet guy. But yeah, we were constantly butting heads, and they would joke and they called him the king or the czar, right, of Ukrainian pop. And I was like, well, I'm the queen over here. So if that's the case, like, yeah, so we would always fight, and everyone was joking, you know, it's the king and the queen are fighting. But I won out in the end, and he literally did tell me I was right. But I was telling him, you need to present her like an American singer would, you know, not like she's this foreigner coming in, but like she is ready for the Western stage. And so
She adapted. She
yeah,
adapted well.
she adapted, my God. And that's what I was at first, before meeting her, I was afraid of what her musicianship was like, what her actual level of artistry was like. And she proved to me to have a pretty high level. And it was mostly just knowing herself and knowing who she was. And I really felt that, you know, that she was comfortable in her skin. And I think
Yeah.
as an artist, that's what's like so key. Like no matter in what setting you are, and especially in this kind of setting, if she had been uncomfortable or like worried that you know, she was without her comfort, her blanket, like her comfort blanket of her
Right.
band, right? And she was without, but she stood strong. She stood tall. And I threw a bunch of like amazing session musicians from Austin at her. No rehearsal, no time to like practice anything. They all got on the stage together. And it was literally up until the 11th hour that producer, the Ukrainian record label owner, was arguing with me, up until 5 minutes before she had to take the stage. And I was like, no. We are having her take the stage with these musicians. These people have come to see live music. This is the live music capital of the world. Do you know what that means? There has to be live music. Yeah. No playbacks, okay?
You don't speak Ukrainian either, do you?
Oh, no. They spoke Russian. So we were arguing in Russian, which was great. It was great and really frustrating. So
and you know, this is the most hyperbolic situation for this, but sometimes when you're, as an artist, when you're put under so much pressure, that's really when your sort of innate talents come out, and you just pull it off, right?
Absolutely.
And this was broadcast CNN, CBS, everyone.
Yeah, but this was my point, was that if we hadn't packaged her as this Western ready artist, so, you know, Ukraine always wanted to be part of the West. And I'm like, okay, well, now you got to prove it, right? You got to prove it through your art. You got to prove it through your voice and through the way in which you take the stage, way in which you take this platform, because here's this great opportunity, South by Southwest official concert, okay? And you don't want to blow it. You cannot blow it. And literally they were coming to me with all of these preconceived notions and premeditated on how this was going to go. Her manager, Anton, and then her record label owner, Yuri, like they were both arguing with me and saying, no, this is not so much a showcase. This is a show that, no, this is not a show. This is just us, you know, talking about Ukraine. And I'm like, okay, however, you want to help Ukraine, we have to do, there's got to be some theater here, you know.
Well, I think that's an interesting point in me too. I didn't even have it in my bullets to think about, to talk about. But this idea that Ukraine does want to be part of the West. Is Ukraine a Western country in terms of its books and its film and its sense of storytelling and so forth, or does it kind of straddle the line still?
Yeah, you know,
music as well.
Yeah, it definitely straddles the line, and it straddles the line geographically, of course, you know, but it also straddles the line in basically every other way. So yes, on the one hand, it's a modern country. It's a pretty modern country, and as several like historians and Ukrainian experts, I'm not fully a Ukrainian expert, but I've, just because it's Russian adjacent, like
Right.
there's a lot that can be applied to both, but it is a modern country. And unlike Russia, unlike Belarus, unlike all these neighboring places, it
Hmm.
has changed its president pretty frequently since the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right.
So I mean, you've had several presidents that are total lame ducks. Like they from the get-go, like they never really did much. It was just like a useless presidency. But the point is they changed their presidents, right?
Right.
They can go to the polls, they can vote someone out. I mean, and this is fresh, probably pretty fresh on anybody's mind, but especially when we had Trump here in the US, like they in Ukraine were, ready to change out their solid statesman, Petro Poroshenko, the chocolate king, which I guess somehow prepared him for politics, but that's okay. So, they were willing to change him out for a guy who was a TV comedian
Right.
and whose show was on Netflix, right?
Yeah, there's an angle there.
In which he played a president,
Right.
or played the role of a school teacher getting voted for by all of his students and all the youth in the country, and then he became president, which is not a far shot from what the actual truth is. So
Yeah,
yeah.
there's an angle there, and I'm not sure how to quite tackle that part of it. But in terms
but
of
but
like how acting and how television can perhaps seep over into
well,
politics,
exactly. I mean,
I feel
it's
like
like,
we've seen that here
yeah, no, media influences
briefly.
the arts, and it influences politics, and it influences, I mean, media is this crazy amount of like noise and
Yeah.
noise pollution or whatever that just does get into our heads in
Well,
many ways. But
on that note, then I do want to touch upon how the film industry, how theater, how everything is kind of going to change due to the war, mainly because of this shift in population. You have Ukrainians that are fleeing the country. That probably a lot of them might not come back, right?
yeah,
I guess you could liken it to a lot of Germans leaving Germany to come to the U.S. to become performers here, to become actors here, to become writers and so forth.
right.
You can read a million articles about how that's inevitably going to happen in Russia too, right? Where you'll have Russian artists that are going to leave Russia, and that's it. They're going to come here. They're going to come, to other Western nations, I would assume,
Yeah,
or the Eastern nations for that matter.
that's right.
How do you? If you haven't given it that much thought, that's fine too. But how do you think that's going to shift? Or first of all, do you think that's going to play out?
Hmm. um So I do think that initially you'll see a lot of people, artists and creators and whatnot, leaving Ukraine, but I do think they will come back to Ukraine because as long as, and this is no guarantee, as long as Ukraine keeps its, hands clean, so to speak, in this war, and doesn't, you know, do anything that's going to damage their credibility, damage their reputation, damage the story they're able to tell,
Mm-hmm.
then I think they have a very good chance of rebuilding their country, much like Germany has become this, this beacon of wealth and,
Right.
cultural health, essentially. So I think the same thing, and also Germany's, democracy is strong, right?
Right.
So I think the same thing can happen to Ukraine, and in fact, it probably will. And in an ironic sort of way, Putin trying to pull Ukraine away from the West is only just pushing Ukraine towards the West, towards being more democratic, while trying to retain and this kind of, trying to retain their cultural values and their cultural heritage. And this kind of goes back to your question about whether they're Western or not. Western and not is what I'll say there. But and then in terms of like, what about the creators in Russia? Like, are they yeah, they're definitely going to leave. And I think
Mhm.
it's much more dire for Russia than it is for Ukraine. I think that there is so much fierce like pride and patriotism and nationalism that's happening in Ukraine right now, and so much love for the president, for Zelensky, because he is essentially fighting a war that has almost 100% approval,
Right.
even amongst the Russian speakers. And by the way, there are a ton of Russian speakers all over Ukraine.
Right. Which I think is
Yeah,
worth noting.
yeah, which is super worth noting. And anyway, I think that this war is far more damaging in the long run to Russia than it ever will be to Ukraine.
In terms of politics, in terms
In terms of
of the
politics,
arts.
in terms of arts, in terms of any sort of influence. I mean, really, this is the end of Russian influence.
Because it weakens the sense of nationalism.
Because it weakens, well, okay, firstly, it will lead to this brain drain. As soon as people can start to leave, young people are going to leave. They're going to leave in droves if possible. Now, but that's the key, if possible. Like, I think Putin has through his actions and through the fact that now they are hit so hard with these sanctions and such. I mean, I'm in contact with my friends in Russia, and it's hard for us to talk about anything because we're both afraid to say the wrong thing and both afraid to get
Right.
the other in trouble. And but it's very clear that they don't see a future for them there. And so in a very sad sort of way, we've thrust them into, and by we, I do mean America, I do mean the West, with the sanctions that are just blighting the people, blighting the economy. I mean, in a few weeks, it's really going to start to hit, and they're going to be thrust into this Cold War again on their end, right? I mean, to where they're cut off from basic Western things that they've grown accustomed to. I mean, being in Moscow or St. Petersburg, any of these like European side of Russia cities, I mean, it's really, they're so modern, so
Sure.
modern. Like,
Right.
they are more technologically forward than even like New York or something. I was shocked. I was shocked. And so what's going to happen to all of that when they don't have access to, the things that they're used to, the technology they're used to, because they can't afford it, or because, I don't know, any number of things. But
Right.
yeah, it's just really sad.
Just to briefly touch upon this too, I think we both think this is really stupid, so we don't have to dwell on it. But the fact that, or maybe it's not stupid, I take it back. So part of it seems really dumb. Part of it is like, well, maybe that makes a little bit more sense.
Right.
And there's two sides of it. The one side is you see Russian. There was a Russian pianist. There was a Russian composer. There's Russian, different performers and so forth that are getting their performances canceled around the world, right? That to me doesn't really mean anything. Putin doesn't care about that. The Russian government doesn't care about that, right?
No.
So who are you really punishing in that respect, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Who are you punishing? But, and this is a sad thing, that even if, I mean, there's several sad things, but number one, okay, cutting off Russian films or Russian talent, as the Atlantic article that was just posted was talking about, is, I mean, it sends a message, right, that we disapprove of Russia. We disapprove of Russia. I don't think it sends a message that we disapprove of Putin per se.
It's an attack on the people of Russia,
Yeah,
rather.
it's more an attack on the people of Russia, or like, how can you let him do that?
Right.
It's like a scolding kind of, and in a very demeaning sort of way, like, how dare you condone this? How dare you let him do this? But what are they supposed to do? Like, that's the other problem. I mean, we can sit here very comfortably and complain from our nice suburban houses and whatnot about why there aren't hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg and
shouting, do something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
shouting expletives and hurling like as many insults as possible at the Kremlin. Why aren't there more than one solitary Molotov cocktail thrown at the Kremlin wall?
Right.
It's very easy for us to say that, but I mean, Putin has really given people no choice. And in fact, in some very, very Machiavellian kind of just really horrible way, he has kind of shown the Russian people through his war in Ukraine what he would do to them if they were to have an uprising. Like, he synonymizes himself with Russia. He is not looking at Russia as the Russian people. He is not looking at Russia as all these cities, all these places, all this history, all this amazing culture. He has reached that point where he is synonymous with Russia. He is Russia. But the Russian people don't see it that way.
Right.
And so even though to us in the West, like, I mean, I think we can, when we say, oh, Russia's war in Ukraine, we don't really mean Russia, the whole country. We mean Vladimir Putin, right?
I do think the messaging on that too from the MSM has been fairly good. They've kind of geared it as they've framed it as Putin's war on democracy, on
absolutely,
rather than Russia's war on democracy. What I am, or at least I was kind of on the fence was the idea of studios pulling major films from Russian theaters or pulling stuff out of Russia rather than pulling Russians out of their own cities and countries.
Right.
At least in terms of the performance, is not actually the point. I guess the goal there is to sort of choke the Russian people, so to speak. It's kind of a grim image, but to punish them in such a way where it forces them to quote unquote do something. But as you said, what are they going to do? I think that we obviously take for granted what we're able to do in America when it comes to freedom of speech.
Absolutely.
Which is why I kind of laugh when people say like, "Oh, our freedoms are getting up." Freedoms? What are you talking about?
Really?
Right? And that's both sides make that argument sometimes, and it's almost implausible. But will that have any sort of effect by robbing them of movies, robbing them of culture from outside of Russia? Will that have any effect at all, or is it just kind of more for optics?
I mean, how many people in the West watch Russian movies? I guess
Sure.
is what I'd want to know.
I mean, not many, right?
No, I mean, I do, but like,
well,
other than me and the handful
right.
of Russianists I know and
right.
such, I mean.
But how many people in Russia watch movies from America?
Oh, yeah.
Which is obvious, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, every single movie that you can think of, they watch it over there. So.
And I look at that as, obviously movies and television and theater and so forth is a form of escapism. And when your economy is bad, the arts actually goes up. I think we saw that. We saw it firsthand in 2020, right, during the pandemic. Yeah. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a psychological reason for it, but I'm curious though if that is a good strategy or a bad strategy or a neutral strategy by cutting Russia off entirely. Yeah.
I don't have an answer. I think to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not like the Russian people themselves want this war.
Right.
So, nobody wants war, right? But I really don't think the Russian people, if they knew, the majority of them really fully understood what was going on in Ukraine, would want this war. And so therefore I don't see how cutting off movies, how doing any of these things helps because it just gives Putin like this ammo, just, it gives him more like music to sing to, essentially, to his people, telling them, look at the West, they are being so aggressive, and they're attacking us, and so we have to be defending our nation.
Could that be a form of getting the truth of the war to, I guess, ordinary Russians who I've been told, and I've read, who don't believe what's going on, which is almost inconceivable for us because we have so much access to information, right? But if major bands in Europe and elsewhere are pulling out of Russia and canceling performances, isn't that going to signal a red flag that, oh, maybe we are doing something that we shouldn't be doing?
Right. No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, at some point, people will have to question the propaganda, question the Putin's message to them, because essentially what Putin is doing is he's waging a war against the world. Well, against truth, against information, and against the world order currently. Like he is trying to create a new narrative, trying to reconstruct everything, and you have to wonder what he's thinking, but like for the people, what are they thinking? And that to me is the most interesting, because it's this right now more than ever before. You are seeing divisions within families, within circles of friends, even along the same street, and that it's like during the Cold War, but not nearly the way it is now.
No,
This is way worse than it used to be. During the Cold War, there was definitely a lot of division in terms of, father against son, because the son would be of the mind that, the government is kind of keeping him from his freedom, but while the father still has his head like back in the Great Patriotic War, which is what they call World War II, right? So, the perspectives, the milieus were different from even just one generation to the next, such that it did create division, and it created this, the younger generation. With every subsequent new generation, the effects of Soviet propaganda was less and less and less. And but yeah, there was still like all these levels of division, and now it's the same thing, because you have the youth across Russia who are more, you kind of have to be kind of tech savvy to be able to get away from the Russian propaganda. You have to be able to use your VPN clients. You have to be able to use all this kind of stuff and know how to get around the blocks, right? So that you can access Western sources. You can still use Facebook. You can still use Twitter. You can still do all these things and find out what's actually going on. But so older people are not necessarily going to do that, because maybe they weren't even on social media in the first place. And so, if that's the case, what are they tuning into? They're only tuning into state TV, state propaganda.
We see that here.
Oh, yeah.
With all of our access to everything, we see older generations, they're just going to watch Fox News or CNN, and that's
right. And that's my mother right there, actually.
Which one is it? Should I ask?
No.
Okay.
No, she listens to Fox News all the time, and I cannot talk to her about politics, like, to save my life. If we start on that road, like, I will probably hang up the phone. So
yeah.
And but we don't have a war going on between our two states. Like, she's in Oklahoma, I'm in Texas. Oh my God, actually that would be a perfect analogy for Russia versus Ukraine, because
if Texas invaded
if Texas invaded Oklahoma because too many people watch Fox or something like that. Like, I don't know. I mean, it would be like that equivalent of stupidity, because it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, speaking of, this is a good segue, actually. I can't believe we only have 15 minutes left, but I had a bullet point here about art as ethical propaganda.
Yeah.
And I know you had some thoughts on that, and I did want to bring up, and I haven't seen it. I was going to watch it last night because I still haven't seen it. And I think subconsciously, I'm like, I really don't want to give the airtime to it. But the Oliver Stone documentary, or the interview, I guess he had with Putin 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Which you've seen, and it's kind of pedestals him, so to speak, if I can make that a verb.
Yeah. I mean, I think it again, this goes back to the whole bias of filmmakers and such. And I think Oliver Stone has a bias towards Vladimir Putin. And
But why? Why does he have a bias?
I don't know. Like, I don't know why one would have a bias.
Like, would Donald Trump have a bias toward Putin?
Oh yeah.
A lot of
absolutely. But I feel like Oliver Stone's bias is very similar to Trump's bias, because it's like this. It's this weird worshiping or respect of certain character traits that Putin had, and that Putin had more of, I would say, pre-pandemic. I feel like he's become way more Stalin-esque, way more paranoid. His mind, his whole thought process, I feel, has very much changed in the time following the onset of the pandemic, right? I feel like he's gone through some trauma with that whole time, and with the number of Russians that died, which definitely they did not disclose the accurate numbers. Right. And there's something to be said for that, like why he still sits, like, 20 feet away, or more than that actually, from even him
getting longer and longer.
They're getting longer and longer. Like, I feel like before they were reasonable, and I feel like before he would stand the 10 feet or whatever away from, like, Angela Merkel, for example. There was this it right. seemed in the realm of reasonable and also protective of both himself and the other person. And now it's just like he's just trying to save himself rather, right. all the time. Like, everything is about him. And this war is about him. It's not about Nazis. It's not about neo-Nazis. It's not about Ukrainians or Russians or anything. It's totally about him. And so Oliver Stone, I think what he admired in Putin, and I would be interested actually to know what Oliver Stone thinks now of Putin, or if Oliver Stone himself is just like, like his bias, like, it's just whole strong. But, right. I think pre-pandemic Putin, there was something to be admired, dare I say, in his phlegmatic attitude, I would right. say. When it came to dealing with world leaders, when it came to dealing with conflicts with people in general. And there was always this, just F off across his forehead, like, all the time. Right. And I think there was something to be admired somewhat about that. Like, he wasn't going to kowtow to changing the changing times, the cultural nuances, whatever's trending. Like, he's not a man to be like, yeah, I'm going to go with what's trending. Like, he's not going to follow a hashtag. So I think that's what Stone liked, maybe. I don't know.
Where do you draw the line because you've worked in film, obviously, you've written fiction and nonfiction. Where do you draw the line and say, maybe I shouldn't be giving this person a platform through media? Or is there a line? And it's open to, audience interpretation, in other words.
I know.
There's something to be said. Now, well, this is a whole other conversation, but you can look at, Lenny Riefenstahl and Triumph of the Will, mm-hmm. and you look at that as a piece of really brilliant propaganda, right? And the way it was, it just started to go on artistic form. I think when you have a film, whether it's a documentary or a scripted thing that gives something a platform, the way it's executed can mean everything as well, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'm just curious if there is like that. Where is the ethic, the ethics in A, what you cover, and B, how you cover it?
I know.
These are rhetorical. I'm just giving you rhetorical.
I know, because it's like I can't answer it, because I've wrestled with these same questions for so long. It's like, yeah. But the fact is, propaganda to to one person, and then like, soft power to another person, and then diplomacy to another person. Like, it's
Right.
it's so much a matter of perspective. I mean, and that's why art is beautiful and horrific at the same time, because
Right.
it's all in the eye or the ear or the soul of the beholder. It's like, how do you as the recipient take it? Are you going to take it as art? Are you going to take it as propaganda? Are you going to take it as like downright outright lies? Are you going to take it as, the best thing ever? Like, that's why art is great.
Isn't all art propaganda?
It can be. Yeah, it depends
I mean,
on
you
how.
look at you can drop a link for this too, like the art that you see already coming out of Ukraine, like actual physical, I'm talking about visual
Mhm.
art. Um, it's a form of propaganda, but that's what I bring up.
Right.
I
I
don't think
mean,
I coined this term, but ethical propaganda, right?
yeah. And it's hard to say if any propaganda is ethical or can be ethical, in like completely ethical rather, right?
Right.
Because I mean, in like going back to Soviet times again, or back to like World War II, I mean, the amount of art and such that was created during that time, that was encouraged, and that was always made with a slant, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was so much of it, and you could say that it helped, with the morale of people. It helped raise morale. It helped to justify actions. It helped to give people purpose. It helped the army to keep going when it felt like they're, army on both sides. I'm not even going to say whether Soviet sides or Nazis. Like, it didn't matter. It helped both sides. So,
Mm-hmm.
and and I always wondered, like, if you took away propaganda and eliminated propaganda entirely from war or from conflict, like, what would war and conflict look like? Would it last as long as it does or has? Would it last would it last even longer? Would it keep
Mm-hmm.
going in a, or would it take a different, direction altogether? Uh, so
Well,
I don't.
to really wrap everything in sort of the same package, the South by Southwest events, the videos you'll see on social media and Twitter, but the woman playing the piano one last time in her bombed out apartment, right?
Yeah.
The paintings and stuff you see from children that are documenting the war. Even when, let's say we do get this oddly ill-timed documentary in a month from now, right, about the beginning stages of the war, and it's done beautifully, and it's showing the
Yeah.
plight of the Ukrainian people or whatever, exploitive or not, that's going to help build sympathy and get more people onto the Ukrainian side. Which, let's be honest, I don't want to paint anything as good and evil, but there is a right side here and there is a wrong side, right? Putin's wrong. That's right. There's no way to. This isn't the U.S. Iraq situation. We're like, well, there's gray area, whatever. Um, so, but knowing that, um, there's a certain power that you have with that a tank can't buy you, right?
Right.
Not to get too
No.
emo about it, but
Yeah.
it's true. Um, like you said, like that, I'm sure. How many people came out for the South by Southwest Ukrainian
A
event?
lot. A ton of people. I mean,
Thousands, right?
yeah, yeah, it was a lot. And I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off, so I
Right.
didn't even do a head count, but yeah, it was packed.
And
So,
that leads to my I guess my last question. Like, what can ordinary people do? The writer in America, and the filmmaker in the UK or something. What can they do besides just throw money to charities, which is fine, by the way. And we can drop a link to a recommended
yeah, the
charity here.
Ukraine Relief Network is a good
Yeah.
one, but yeah, it's a really tough question, because what can you do? I mean, other than go and fight, or go and like get your hands dirty and get involved with one of these organizations that's doing a lot of, great work on the ground. What else can you do? Well, I mean, you can take part in rallies and protests and such, but I would say personally, like you can inform yourself
Hmm.
of all the sides of the argument. I mean, because you don't just want to just see the Western perspective. You also want to understand the Russian perspective too. Even, get into the kind of like the Eastern side of things, like
Hmm.
just starting to to just kind of pull these pieces together and just like kind of fill in these blanks for yourself. I mean, that's really important because it's all fine and well to be like, yeah, Russia is wrong here and Ukraine is right. That's great, but like why? I
Right.
mean, it's important to understand that there is some truth to Putin's neo-Nazi argument, just a little bit, a tiny bit. It's
Right.
not enough to justify an invasion at all, but there
No.
is some truth.
I mean, we
But
talked about, we had
yeah,
neo-Nazis here. If we went to war tomorrow with China or somewhere, we'd be fighting along neo-Nazis in
exactly.
America because we're bound by a common enemy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it gets very messy, and
Hmm.
that's also why whenever I see a documentary come out about anything, it's hard to it's hard to film it in such a way where you are getting this truly objective sort of view of both sides and the nuance and all that. It's going to take a position.
Yeah.
Um, so again, just to really go back to the beginning, that's why I changed my mind again. I'm like, well, how is this thing going to be put together? That Penn might be doing,
Yeah. I
So
mean, I can imagine he's going to make Zelensky look like the hero. He'll be the main character. I mean, I can already
right,
see that for sure. And then you're
and he
going to be
should be. I mean,
as
let's
he
acknowledge
should.
the fact.
I mean,
Right.
he has, and that's the other thing. I mean, Zelensky's playing a role right now, and what he's doing is art in itself. So, it's the role of a lifetime for him, and he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
But yeah, without him, there probably wouldn't be as much of a Ukrainian resistance as there has been, because he is propaganda himself for the nation.
Ethical
For
propaganda, you might argue.
sure, yes, we will say
I mean,
ethical
even
propaganda, definitely in this case, because we know that Russia should not be doing this at
right,
all. So
even his theatrics and his sense of
even his
humor,
theatrics, yeah.
in spite of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question that we cannot answer is, did he do the right thing by fighting back, or should he have tried harder to achieve
Mm.
some sort of some sort of middle ground, some sort of, um, compromise, right? That would have saved the lives and the cities that have already been destroyed.
You know the answer to that probably, right?
Maybe I do, but I'm not going to say it because
Right.
it's probably going to be wrong. So
Yeah. There are no right answers.
there are no right
Um,
answers. Everything is gray. Red,
yeah.
there's no black and white here. Even in Ukraine, there's no black and white. It is not, they're not 100% the good guys, and Russia's definitely not 100% the bad guys either. So we just have to keep that all in mind, because
No one's
if
ever 100% the good guys.
no one is ever 100% right or wrong or good or bad. And so we just have to keep that in mind and not, start expelling Russian artists and Russian students and Russian whatever from America, because this is our chance to like influence them and make sure that when Russia comes out of this, because there will be an other side.
Right.
When they come out on this other side, we want to be sure that the United States, very specifically the United States, doesn't screw it up this time, because we screwed it up following 1991. We kind
Yeah.
of left Russia, the newborn Russian Federation, to do its thing, and when they were actually looking to us for guidance, and we never gave it to them. So
Yeah. Um, Neither here nor there, but I was watching something where it mentioned how Boris Yeltsin, before he died, one of the last things he said to his inner circle was, to paraphrase, I think I made a mistake with this Putin fella.
yes.
And I don't know if there's something. We're off topic now, but we're ending anyway. I don't know if there's anything the West can or should do when it comes to nation building, even with nations that are adjacent to the West, right?
Mhm.
Um, maybe that influence comes in other ways. So
It does.
anyhow, well, look, our hearts and sympathies are with Oksana. I'm sorry that she couldn't make it, but again, we understand why she wasn't here. I'd like to thank Michelle for taking the time out of her insanely busy schedule. Our days are simple compared to some of yours. So
Okay.
thank you for taking the
Happy
time.
to
Thank you
do it.
everybody for coming, and we shall see you at the next town hall, which will probably be about screenwriting structure and nothing quite as heavy. But this was great. I'm looking forward to doing more of these in the future. So thank you, everyone.